Under the frost-kissed gaze of the eternal moon, a single snowflake traced the path of forgotten dreams, landing like a whisper on the blade of her trembling sword. Alara's breath fogged the chill air of the northern spires, where the wind howled through jagged peaks like the lament of banished spirits. The training grounds of the Royal Guard stretched before her, a vast expanse of packed snow and ice, scarred by the boots of warriors who had long deemed her unworthy. She was an Omega in a world carved for alphas, her scent a subtle bloom of wild heather amid the sharp tang of pine and steel. At 23 winters, she had clawed her way into these trials not by birthright, but by sheer, unyielding will. A will that now felt as brittle as the icicles dangling from the ancient stone walls of Eldridge Keep. The insignia pinned to her woolen tunic, a tarnished silver wolf's head etched with lunar phases, caught the pale light filtering through the storm clouds. It was her symbol, her fragile claim to belonging, passed down from a father who had died defending the king's banner. But today, it mocked her as much as the guards did. "Omega whelp!" they had jeered during the dawn muster, their voices echoing off the frozen cliffs. "Go back to weaving baskets by the hearth. The moon doesn't favor the weak." She gripped her sword tighter, the leather hilt biting into her calloused palms. The blade was heavier than her resolve, forged in the royal smithy for hands stronger than hers. Around her, the other recruits, hulking betas and alphas with fur-lined cloaks and eyes like sharpened flint, formed ranks under the watchful gaze of Captain Thorne, a grizzled veteran whose scar ran from brow to jaw like a river of old blood. The air smelled of sweat-soaked leather and the metallic bite of oiled weapons, undercut by the earthy musk of shifting pack dynamics. Ilara's Omega instincts urged her to submit, to lower her gaze and fade into the snow. But she straightened her spine, feeling the cold seep through her threadbare boots. The drills began with the clash of steel, a symphony of grunts and thuds that reverberated through the valley. Ilara moved with the precision her father had taught her in hidden glades, her strikes fluid despite the ache in her limbs. But precision meant nothing here. As she parried a blow from recruit Garrick, a broad-shouldered alpha with a sneer that curled like smoke, he twisted deliberately, sending her sprawling into a drift of powder. Laughter rippled through the line, sharp as breaking ice. "Up, little flower," Garrick taunted, his boot nudging her side none too gently. "Or do Omegas melt under pressure?" His packmates joined in, their howls mocking the distant cries of wolves in the shadowed forests below. Captain Thorne watched from his perch on a boulder, arms crossed, his silence a verdict heavier than words. Ilara pushed herself up, snow clinging to her dark braids like unwanted jewels, tasting blood where her lip had split against her teeth. The insignia glinted mockingly at her chest, its silver dulled by the grit of the fall. She lunged again, channeling the fire that burned low in her belly, a heat that no Omega chill could quench. Her blade whistled through the air, nicking Garrick's vambrace. He roared, more in surprise than pain, and countered with a sweep that caught her shoulder, the impact sending jolts of fire through her arm. She staggered, but held her ground, eyes locked on his, refusing the instinctive urge to bare her throat. Around them, the world narrowed to this frozen arena, the crunch of snow underfoot, the ragged cadence of breaths mingling with the wind's wail, the faint, spiritual pull of the moon overhead, as if the goddess herself leaned in to witness. By midday, the sun had barely pierced the overcast sky, casting everything in a ghostly pallor. Ilara's muscles screamed, her vision blurring at the edges, but she pressed on through the gauntlet of spars and endurance runs. The guard's mockery evolved into something crueler, whispers of her place in the pack, suggestions that she warmed beds better than she wielded steel. One beta, a sly-eyed youth named Lear, tripped her during the obstacle course, his chuckle lost in the gale as she tumbled into a thorned thicket at the course's edge. Thorns tore at her cloak, drawing thin lines of blood that welled warm against the cold. She rose, ignoring the sting, her hand instinctively touching the insignia. It was warm, almost feverish, as if it carried her father's unyielding spirit. As the session drew to a close, Captain Thorne called a halt. The recruits gathered in a ragged semicircle, steam rising from their bodies like sacrificial offerings. Alara stood at the fringe, chest heaving, the metallic tang of her own blood mixing with the scent of exertion. Thorne's gaze swept over them, lingering on her with a mix of disdain and something unreadable, pity perhaps, or the ghost of curiosity. "You've all shown your mettle today," he growled, his voice gravel over ice. "But metal breaks without forge. Garrick, Lear, front and center for commendation." The two stepped forward, basking in nods and backslaps. Alara's heart twisted, a knot of rejection tightening like a noose. She had fought not for glory, but for a chance to prove that an Omega's strength lay not in submission, but in the quiet fire that refused to be snuffed. "Dismissed," Thorne barked, but as the others dispersed toward the barracks' flickering torchlight, he singled her out. "You, Omega, a word." She approached, the snow muffling her steps, dread pooling in her gut like melting ice. His eyes, steel gray under bushy brows, bored into hers. "This isn't a game for dreamers. The Royal Guard serves the Alpha King, Alara Voss. His wars are etched in blood and bone, not heather-scented whims. You've got heart, I'll grant you that, but heart alone won't shield you from the pack's teeth." She met his stare, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. "Then teach me to bear my own. Captain, the moon marks us all, Alpha, Beta, Omega. Why should I yield when the goddess whispers otherwise?" He snorted, a sound like cracking frost, and waved her away. But as she turned, trudging through the deepening dusk, the insignia pressed against her skin like a promise, or a curse. The howls of the guards faded behind her, swallowed by the encroaching night, leaving only the moon's silver vigil and the first stirrings of a deeper exile, the isolation of one who dared to rise where she was meant to kneel. In the shadow of the keep's towering walls, Alara paused, gazing at the blood-flecked snow at her feet. It steamed faintly in the cold, a fleeting warmth against the encroaching freeze. What was strength, if not choosing to stand amid the storm, even as the world willed you broken? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the wind carried the distant weevo of wolves, a call to something wilder, waiting just beyond the horizon. Alara trudged through the deepening twilight, the weight of the day's humiliations settling into her bones like fresh fallen snow. The insignia at her chest pulsed with a faint, unnatural warmth, as if protesting the chill that seeped from the ground and clawed at her skin. Eldridge Keep loomed ahead, its spires piercing the bruised sky like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast, torches flickering in narrow windows like distant stars mocking her solitude. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke from the lower barracks. Fires kindled against the encroaching night, where the other recruits would share tales of their triumphs, their laughter a barrier she could never breach. She veered from the main path, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, toward the forgotten eastern wing of the keep. It was a place shunned even by the lowliest servants, its stone walls crumbling under vines of ice and shadow, haunted by rumors of the Alpha King's private retreats. King Alaric, they called him, the melancholy sovereign, his rule etched in the scars of a war that had claimed his mate and left his pack fractured. Whispers spoke of his guilt, a shadow that clung to him like frost on a blade, driving him to wander these forsaken halls when the moon waxed full. Alara had never seen him, only heard the guards' hushed tones, their awe laced with fear. An Alpha King broken by loss, they said, his once unyielding command now tempered by a sorrow that made him untouchable. The path narrowed, flanked by drifts of snow that swallowed her boots to the ankle. Her breath came in ragged clouds. the metallic tang of her earlier blood still lingering on her tongue. Why here? The question gnawed at her, but the insignia burned hotter now, a beacon pulling her forward. A low growl rumbled from the darkness ahead, freezing her mid-step. Not a wolf, deeper, more human, laced with pain. She drew her dagger, the one her father had gifted her, its hilt wrapped in worn leather that smelled of earth and forgotten summers. Heart pounding like distant thunder, she crept closer, the crunch of her steps muffled by the wind's mournful sigh. There, in an alcove half buried in snow, he lay. King Alaric, slumped against the weathered stone, his fur-lined cloak torn and matted with blood that seeped from a gash across his ribs. His broad frame, honed by battles that had forged empires, seemed diminished in the dim light, his silver-streaked hair disheveled, falling over eyes that burned with feral intensity. The air around him hummed with alpha musk, dominant storm-tossed pine and iron, but undercut by something vulnerable, a raw edge of exhaustion that made her omega senses stir unbidden. He clutched a hand to his side, crimson staining his fingers, the wound fresh, as if clawed by an enemy's talons or the ghosts of his past. Their gazes locked and time fractured like ice underfoot. Instinct surged through Alara, a tidal pull toward him, her body urging submission even as her mind recoiled. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the dagger in her grip. This was the king, the architect of the guard's rigid hierarchies that had branded her an outsider. Curiosity flickered beneath the terror, a spark ignited by the insignia's insistent heat, as if it recognized something in him. He was no mere wounded warrior. He was the storm incarnate, his presence commanding the very air to still. Who dares approach? His voice was gravel and silk, laced with the rumble of suppressed pain. He shifted, wincing, his eyes narrowing on her insignia, the silver wolf catching the faint moonlight that pierced the clouds. Recognition dawned, mingled with disdain. An Omega recruit? The goddess mocks me further. Ilara's throat tightened, the words she might have spoken dying on her lips. She should flee, report this breach of protocol, but her feet rooted to the snow, the cold seeping upward like doubt. Instead, she sheathed her dagger, hands trembling not from fear alone, but from the inexplicable draw of his scent, wrapping around her like a cloak against the gale. "You're bleeding, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind within. "Let me help. The cold will claim you otherwise." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the stones, sending a shiver down her spine. "Help from a whelp who can't even stand among my guards? Begone, Omega. My wounds are my own to bear, the price of a crown stained with too much blood." Yet he didn't move to drive her away, his gaze lingering on her face, tracing the split lip and the resolve in her eyes. The connection hummed between them, instinctive and denied, born of his guarded pain and her quiet defiance. She saw the guilt in the lines of his face, the way his hand hovered over the wound, not just to staunch it, but to hide the vulnerability beneath. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into their faces, blurring the world to white and shadow. Ilara stepped closer, ignoring the rational voice screaming retreat. She tore a strip from her cloak, the fabric ripping with a sound like tearing silk, and knelt beside him. The metallic scent of his blood mingled with her heather essence, a forbidden alchemy that made the air thicken. "Strength isn't in solitude," she murmured, pressing the cloth to his side, her touch light but unyielding. He tensed, a growl building in his chest, but he allowed it, his breath hitching as warmth met cold. In that moment, under the moon's indifferent watch, the insignia flared against her skin, its lunar phases seeming to shift like living silver. Alaric's eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of something ancient passing between them, fear, perhaps, or the first whisper of destiny. The encounter lingered, heavy with unspoken questions. As the night deepened around them, the distant weavos of the pack, a reminder that refuge was fleeting and bonds forged in blood could shatter as easily as they healed. What was redemption, if not reaching for the fallen king amid the storm, even when every instinct warned of the fall? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow fell thicker now, veiling the alcove in a shroud of white silence, as if the goddess herself conspired to hide their fragile alliance from the prying eyes of the keep. Ilara's hands trembled against the makeshift bandage, the warmth of Alaric's blood seeping through the cloth like a secret too heavy to contain. His breath came in shallow rasps, each one stirring the fine hairs on her neck, a proximity that ignited her omega instincts into a blaze she dared not name. The insignia at her chest thrummed in rhythm with his pulse, its silver wolf seeming to prowl beneath her skin, urging her onward even as fear clawed at the edges of her resolve. "We can't stay here," she whispered, her voice cutting through the wind's relentless dirge. The distant clamor of voices echoed from the main path. Guards on patrol, their boots crunching like bones underfoot, lanterns swinging like accusatory stars. If they found the king like this, wounded and exposed, whispers of weakness would unravel the fragile threads of his rule. And her? An omega tending to him in secret would be branded a traitor, or worse, a temptress weaving spells in the shadows. Alaric's eyes, storm dark and fever bright, met hers, the denial in them cracking like thin ice. He was no longer the untouchable sovereign. Here, in the raw bite of the night, he was a man adrift, his alpha pride warring with the vulnerability she had unwittingly pierced. With a grunt that resonated like thunder in his chest, he pushed himself upright, leaning heavily on the alcove's crumbling wall. The motion tore at his wound, fresh crimson blooming against the bandage, and Ilara caught his arm instinctively, her touch a anchor in the gale. His scent enveloped her, pine laced with iron and the faint underlying sorrow of salt-tanged grief, stirring a curiosity that bordered on compulsion. Why him? Why now? When her own battles had left her scarred and solitary, yet the pull was undeniable, born not of submission, but of a shared exile, his from the throne's cold embrace, hers from the pack's mocking fangs. Deeper into the eastern wing they ventured, the path a treacherous ribbon of ice-slick stone flanked by skeletal pines that clawed at the sky. Ilara led, her dagger drawn, every sense attuned to the night's symphony, the whisper of snow against bark, the muffled thud of their steps, the weavos faint and mournful from the valley below, as if the wolves sensed the fracture in their world. Alaric followed, his weight a shadow at her back, his labored breaths syncing with hers in a rhythm that felt perilously intimate. The cold gnawed at them both, seeping through cloaks and flesh, but the insignia burned steadily, a talisman against the freeze, its lunar etchings glowing faintly in the moon's diffused light. They stumbled upon the refuge by chance, or perhaps by the moon's subtle guidance, a hidden cavern mouth yawning behind a curtain of icicles, its entrance veiled by overhanging boughs heavy with frost. Ilara parted the frozen veil with her blade, the crackle of breaking ice echoing like shattering resolve. Inside, the air hung still and ancient, scented with damp earth and the mineral tang of underground streams. A narrow fissure in the ceiling allowed slivers of moonlight to pierce the gloom, illuminating a shallow alcove where remnants of an old fire pit smoldered with forgotten embers. Perhaps a hunter's shelter from seasons past, or a trader's bolt hole in times of betrayal. Alaric collapsed against the far wall, his broad frame folding with a weariness that twisted Ilara's heart. She knelt by the pit, striking flint from her pouch until sparks caught on gathered tinder. Dry moss and splintered branches scavenged from the entrance. Flames flickered to life, tentative at first, then roaring with a hunger that mirrored her own suppressed turmoil. The fire's glow danced across his face, casting shadows that deepened the hollows of his cheeks, revealing the fine lines etched by years of command and loss. His mate's death haunted him still. She sensed it in the way his gaze drifted to the flames, as if seeking absolution in their fleeting warmth. "You risk everything for a stranger," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. He watched her tend the fire, adding larger logs with careful hands, the heat blooming against the cavern's chill like a promise of survival. Blood from his side had darkened the bandage, but the flow slowed, stanched by her unyielding pressure earlier. Empathy stirred in her then, unbidden, a recognition of wounds not just of flesh, but of spirit. She had been left to bleed in the training grounds, mocked and diminished. He carried the weight of a kingdom's blood on his soul, the guilt of a war that had stolen his light. "Not a stranger," Alara replied softly, settling beside him with a water skin pressed to his lips. The water was icy, drawn from a trickle in the cavern's depths, but he drank deeply, his throat working with a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "The moon led me to you, and in this place, titles mean nothing. Only survival." Her words hung between them, laced with the scent of smoke and heather, the fire's crackle underscoring the intimacy of their shared breath. She peeled back the bandage to inspect the gash, a deep slash, likely from a rival's claw in some shadowed skirmish, the edges ragged with infection's threat. With steady fingers, she cleansed it using strips from her own cloak, the sting drawing a hiss from him that echoed her own hidden pains. As she worked, their eyes met again, the connection deepening from instinct to something tethering, a bond forged in the crucible of necessity. Alaric's hand covered hers briefly, calloused and warm, halting her ministrations. "Why do you fight it?" he asked, his tone laced with the melancholy that defined him, a king who had lost faith in mercy. "An Omega's place is not to mend Alphas, especially not one like me, cursed by choices that drowned my pack in blood." Ilara's breath caught, the fire's heat mirroring the flush creeping up her neck. She thought of the guard's jeers, the insignia that had marked her as both heirloom and curse, the rejection that had honed her into something unbreakable. "Because I've known exile too," she confessed, her voice threading through the cavern's hush. "Mocked, pushed down, left to freeze. If strength is choosing mercy amid the storm, then perhaps we're both in need of it." The words were philosophy wrapped in vulnerability, the air thickening with unspoken truths, their sense mingling, alpha dominance yielding to omega resilience, curiosity blooming into trust. Outside, the wind howled fiercer, carrying the distant bay of hounds, pursuers perhaps, drawn by the king's absence, or shadows of old enemies sniffing betrayal in the night. Alaric tensed, his body coiling like a spring despite the pain, but Alara placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. They were allies now, bound by this hidden sanctum, the fire their sentinel against the encroaching dark. The insignia warmed against her skin, its wolf's gaze seeming to watch over them, a symbol of paths untrodden, where rejection could forge redemption. In the fire's embrace, as the moon's light waned, Ilara wondered, what was a bond, if not two souls choosing refuge in the heart of the tempest, even when the world beyond demanded their surrender? The question lingered, unanswered, as the flames whispered secrets only the night could hear. The fire's glow ebbed and flowed like the tide of a hidden sea, casting elongated shadows that danced across the cavern walls, as if the stones themselves held memories of ancient oaths. Ilara sat close to Alaric, the heat a fragile barrier against the night's insistent chill, her fingers still stained with the drying crimson of his wound. The insignia at her chest hummed with a persistent warmth, its silver wolf's head now seeming less like a relic and more like a living pulse, syncing with the slow rhythm of his breaths. Outside, the wind's howl softened to a mournful keen, carrying the faint, ethereal scent of frost-blooming nightshade through the icicle curtain, a flower said to thrive only under the goddess's direct gaze, blooming in defiance of winter's grasp. Alaric shifted against the stone, his broad shoulders easing for the first time since their flight into this sanctum. The pain in his side had dulled to a throbbing echo, thanks to her careful ministrations. But his eyes, storm gray flecked with gold, held a restlessness that mirrored the flame's flicker. He watched her in silence, the alpha in him warring with the man who had long buried his vulnerabilities beneath layers of royal decree and unspoken grief. "You speak of mercy as if it's a blade you can wield," he said at last, his voice a low rumble that stirred the embers. "But in my world, it's a chain. The pact demands strength unyielding, not this. Tenderness that invites the wolves to the door." Ilara met his gaze, the firelight reflecting in her eyes like captured stars. The connection between them had deepened in the hours since their refuge, empathy weaving threads through the fear and curiosity that had first drawn them together. She felt it in the way his scent lingered on her skin, pine and iron mingling with her heather essence, creating a harmony that both soothed and unsettled. Yet resistance lingered, a rational barrier she erected against the instinctive pull, an omega drawn to an alpha king, in a cavern that felt both womb and tomb. "Mercy isn't weakness," she replied, her words measured, laced with the philosophy her father had instilled during long nights by hearth fires. "It's the fire that reforges what's broken. Without it, what are we but shadows of our scars?" He reached out then, his calloused hand brushing the insignia at her chest, the touch sending a jolt through her like lightning veiled in silk. The silver warmed instantly under his fingers, the lunar phases etched upon it beginning to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence. Ilara gasped, pulling back instinctively, but the glow persisted, spreading from the wolf's head in faint, silvery veins that traced her skin like veins of moonlight. The cavern seemed to hold its breath, the fire steadied to a single, unwavering flame, and the distant weavos outside fell silent, as if the world beyond awaited revelation. "What sorcery is this?" Alaric murmured, his voice laced with awe and a dawning dread. He leaned closer, the wound forgotten in the face of this unfolding mystery. The insignia pulsed brighter, and with it came a surge within Ilara, a clarity sharp as a blade's edge, visions unfurling in her mind like scrolls illuminated by the moon. She saw flashes. The northern spires wreathed in war's red haze, betrayers within the pack cloaked in false loyalties, a rival alpha's shadow encroaching from the southern borders, his ambitions stained with the blood of Alaric's lost mate. But amid the chaos, a path emerged, clear, unyielding, a trail of silver light leading through the storm, guided by an Omega's hand, her insignia, the key that unlocked hidden allegiances and turned the tide. The gift manifested fully then, her hidden dominion as a pathfinder awakening under the strain of their bond. It was no mere intuition, but a spiritual sight bestowed by the goddess to those rare Omegas who bore the lunar mark, the ability to discern destinies intertwined, to reveal truths veiled in shadow and forge roots through betrayal's labyrinth. Ilara's breath hitched as the visions coalesced, her body trembling with the weight of it. She saw Alaric not as the fallen king, but as the linchpin of redemption, his guilt a forge, her resolve the hammer that could reshape the pack. And she, the first Omega to lead, not by force, but by illuminating the moral crossroads where power yielded to compassion. "You?" Alaric's voice cracked, the Alpha's unyielding facade fracturing as he witnessed the glow envelop her form, the cavern bathed in ethereal silver. He grasped her hand, his touch anchoring her amid the torrent, and in that contact, the visions shared, a bridge between their souls. He saw himself through her eyes. The weight of his crown, the ethical torment of wars waged for duty, the melancholy that had isolated him from his own heart. And her, the key to his destiny, the Omega whose rejection had honed her into the guide who could mend the fractured realm. The insignia, it's no heirloom, it's a sign. The goddess has woven our paths, Ilara. You are the pathfinder, the one who sees what even kings cannot. Tears welled in her eyes, hot against the cavern's cool air, the revelation crashing over her like a winter wave. Fear mingled with a profound sense of purpose, the instinctive denial giving way to acceptance. This gift had slumbered within her, awakened now by the fire of their shared exile, the blood and bond that tied them. But with it came the dilemma. To embrace this destiny meant stepping into the heart of the pack's judgment, leading not just guards, but a king toward forgiveness or ruin. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and blooming nightshade, the moon's light strengthening through the fissure above, as if affirming the truth. Alaric pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, the warmth of his breath a counterpoint to the spiritual chill of what they'd uncovered. I resisted this pull, rationalized it as weakness, he confessed, his voice raw with the melancholy that defined him. But you heal what I thought irreparable. The pack mocks you as they once mocked my mercy. Yet in you, I see the redemption I denied myself. Alara's heart pounded. The insignia cooling now, its glow fading to a steady ember. The bond solidified, no longer denied, but acknowledged, a tether of choice amid the lunar weave. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the first hints of dawn's gray light, and with it, the encroaching threat of discovery. What was destiny, if not the courage to claim a gift born of rejection, even when it demanded leading a broken king through the fires of judgment? The question echoed in the cavern's hush, a spiritual crossroads where faith clashed with the shadows of doubt as the flames whispered of trials yet to come. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The dawn's feeble light clawed its way through the cavern's fissure, painting the stone walls in hues of ash and reluctant gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness the unraveling. Alara's visions lingered like echoes in her veins, the insignia at her chest a steady thrum against her skin, its silver wolf now etched with the weight of prophecy. She pulled away from Alaric, the warmth of his forehead against hers, fading into the chill that seeped from the earth, leaving her adrift in the revelation's wake. The Pathfinder's gift had unveiled not just paths through betrayal, but the raw underbelly of the pack's fractures. Traitors woven into the Royal Guard's ranks, their loyalties poisoned by a rival alpha from the southern wilds. A shadow named Draven whose ambitions reeked of blood and stolen thrones. And at the heart of it, Garrick and Lear, the very mocks who had driven her to the brink, now revealed as pawns in a web that threatened to ensnare the king himself. Alaric rose unsteadily, the fire's embers hissing their last as he extinguished them with a sweep of his boot, the scent of charred wood mingling with the metallic tang of his healing wound. His eyes, once veiled in melancholy, now burned with a fierce clarity, the ethical king stirring beneath the layers of guilt. "We face them now," he said, his voice a low growl that resonated through the cavern like distant thunder. "The pack awaits in the great hall, summoned by my absence. Draven's spies have infiltrated deeper than I feared. Your sight confirms it. But to confront them means dragging you into the storm's eye, Ilara. An Omega leading the judgment? The moon may guide, but the wolves will tear at what they don't understand." She stood, the cold stone grounding her as the wind outside howled a warning, whipping snow through the icicle veil in frantic spirals. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the dagger at her belt, but beneath it surged the gift's unyielding pull, a spiritual compass pointing toward the moral crossroads where forgiveness could shatter chains or ignite war. Rejection had forged her, The guard's jeers a forge fire that tempered her resolve. Yet stepping forward now meant choosing between the freedom of exile and the bond that tethered her to him. Love as redemption, not reward. It demanded she bear her soul to the pack that had scorned her, illuminating truths that could redeem or destroy. The insignia warmed, its lunar phases shifting like tides, urging her onward. "I've walked alone too long," she murmured, her breath fogging the air between them. "If destiny is revelation, then let it be in the light of day. For you, Alaric, for the pack that could be whole." They emerged from the cavern into a world reborn in frost, the northern spires cloaked in a fresh blanket of snow that muffled the crunch of their steps like a conspirator's whisper. The path to Eldridge Keep wound through skeletal pines, their branches laden with ice that tinkled like fragile bells in the gusts. Alaric moved with renewed purpose, his limp fading as the Alpha's strength reclaimed him, but Alara felt the weight of eyes upon them even before the keep's gates loomed. Scouts in the tree line, their scents laced with suspicion and the faint rot of deceit. The wind carried weavos from the valley, a chorus of unrest, as if the wolves sensed the fracture widening. The great hall thrummed with tension when they entered, the air thick with the musk of gathered warriors, alphas and betas arrayed in fur-trimmed cloaks, their eyes narrowing on the king's return and the Omega at his side. Torches sputtered along the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters across ancient tapestries depicting lunar battles and bloodied crowns. Captain Thorne stood at the dais, his scarred face a mask of stoic duty, but Garrick and Lear flanked him, their smirks faltering into something predatory as Alara's gaze swept the room. Draven's influence hung invisible, yet palpable. A rival's claw marks etched in the subtle shifts of allegiance. The way a beta's hand lingered too long on his hilt. The averted eyes of those who had once jeered her into silence. Alaric ascended the dais, his presence commanding the hall to hush, the firelight glinting off his silver-streaked hair like a crown of thorns. "The goddess has spoken through unlikely vessels," he declared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, laced with the melancholy of a king who had tasted betrayal's bite. "Traitors walk among us, their fangs aimed at the heart of our pack. Draven's shadow creeps from the south, fueled by old wounds I thought buried." Murmurs rippled like wind through dry leaves, but Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding a war drum against her ribs. The insignia blazed beneath her tunic, its heat a fire in her blood, and with it the Pathfinder's sight unfurled once more. Visions of hidden daggers, whispered pacts in moonless glades, Garrick's hand exchanging a blood-sealed oath with Draven's envoy under the cover of night. She raised her voice, steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the hall's chill seeping into her bones like doubt. "Look to your own, Captain. Garrick, Lear. Their mockery was no jest, but a veil for deeper venom. I see it now. The rose you left frozen in the training drifts, Garrick, marked with Draven's sigil. The thorn that drew my blood was dipped in southern poison." Gasps echoed, steel whispering from sheaths, but Alaric's hand on her shoulder anchored her, his touch a bridge of trust amid the rising storm. Garrick lunged, his face twisting into a snarl, eyes wild with cornered fury. "Lies from an Omega upstart," he roared, but Thorn's blade barred his path, the captain's gaze shifting to Alara with dawning respect and wariness. The confrontation erupted in a visceral clash. Garrick's swing met Alaric's parry, steel singing against steel as blood sprayed across the flagstones, warm and coppery in the torchlight. Lear circled, dagger flashing, but Alara's voice cut through the chaos, her gift manifesting as a silver aura that rippled from the insignia, freezing the traitors in place with threads of lunar light, revelations binding them like chains. "Choose," she commanded, her words a philosophical blade, slicing to the heart. "Pardon for those who yield, or war for the unrepentant. Power without compassion is a throne of ice, cold and crumbling." Draven's distant howl pierced the night outside, a rival's challenge carried on the wind. But within the hall, the pack fractured and reformed. Garrick dropped to his knees, the fight bleeding from him as the visions assailed him too, his own guilt laid bare, the moral weight of betrayal crushing his defiance. Lear followed, whispering oaths of redemption, but others resisted, betas lunging in a frenzy that Alaric quelled with alpha command, his roars mingling with the crack of bone and the wet thud of flesh. Alara stood amid the fray, the snow from her boots melting into crimson pools, her body aching from a glancing blow, yet her spirit unbowed. The choice tore at her: forgive the Mox who had exiled her spirit, or unleash the war that would free her but doom the pack to endless blood? Alaric pulled her from the melee as Thorn's guards subdued the last holdouts, his arms enveloping her in a shelter of pine and iron, his breath ragged against her hair. "You've illuminated the path," he murmured, the melancholy in his eyes yielding to a fragile hope. "But the cost, your freedom for my crown's salvation. Is this love, or merely duty's chain?" Outside, the moon hung full and unforgiving, bathing the spires in silver as Weavos rose in a tapestry of judgment and rebirth. Alara's heart fractured under the dilemma, the insignia cooling like a spent forge. What was true strength, if not forgiving the pack's teeth to heal the king's wounds, even as liberty slipped through her fingers like melting snow? The question burned, unanswered, as the hall fell silent, the air heavy with the scent of blood and dawning choice. The great hall's silence hung heavy as a shroud, broken only by the ragged breaths of the subdued and the drip of blood from wounds fresh and old, pooling on the flagstones like accusations etched in crimson. Ilara stood at the dais' edge, her body a map of the fray, bruises blooming under her torn tunic, the metallic tang of exertion and violence clinging to her skin like a second shadow. The insignia pressed against her chest, its silver wolf now cool and quiescent, as if sated by the revelations it had unleashed. Alaric's arm encircled her waist, a possessive yet tender anchor amid the chaos, his warmth seeping through the chill that clawed at her bones from the open arches where wind howled in like an uninvited witness. The moon's full gaze poured through the high windows, silvering the scene in ethereal light, turning the hall into a temple of judgment where every face bore the weight of exposed truths. Garrick knelt before them, his broad frame bowed, the snarl of defiance melted into a hollow-eyed plea, his hands bound by Thorn's unyielding grip. Lear huddled nearby, whispering fragmented oaths of loyalty, his sly eyes wide with the terror of a pathfinder's unmasking. The pack encircled them, warriors with drawn blades, betas shifting uneasily, their sense a turbulent storm of fear, regret, and the faint, acrid undercurrent of Draven's lingering influence. Captain Thorn's scar twisted as he inclined his head to Ilara, a gesture of reluctant deference that spoke volumes in the flickering torchlight. "The Omega's sight has cut true," he rumbled, his voice gravel over the embers of dying fires. "Traitors unmasked, but the choice falls to the king and to her." Alaric's gaze swept the assembly, his melancholy etched deeper by the night's toll, the ethical king confronting the ruins of his fractured realm. The wound at his side throbbed in rhythm with his heart, a reminder of vulnerabilities shared, but his posture straightened, the Alpha's command reclaiming the air like a gathering storm. "Draven's shadow retreats for now," he declared, his words resonating off the vaulted beams, laced with the sorrow of one who had bartered mercy for survival too many times. His envoys flee the spires, their packs shattered by lunar truth. Yet the pack bleeds from within. "Garrick, Lear, you mocked her, as the court once mocked my grief. Your betrayal was born of ambition's poison, but redemption whispers even to the fallen." Alara's breath caught, the wind from the arches whipping her braids across her face, carrying the distant weavos of wolves that echoed her inner turmoil. The Pathfinder's gift hummed faintly within her, visions flickering at the edges, paths diverging like veins of silver ore, one of exile, where she vanished into the northern wilds, free but forever scarred by rejection's bite. Another of union, leading the guard not as a conqueror, but as a healer of divides, her omega essence the balm to the pack's wounds. Love as redemption demanded sacrifice, her solitude for his wholeness, her hidden fire for the crown's mending. The insignia warmed subtly, its lunar phases a gentle prod, urging her toward the crossroads where power bowed to compassion. She thought of her father's blade, the training ground's frozen jeers, the cavern's intimate glow. All had forged her for this, a rebirth not in glory, but in the quiet choice to forgive. Stepping forward, she faced Garrick, the man whose boot had once nudged her into the snow, his laughter a lash that had drawn first blood. His eyes met hers, stripped of mockery, reflecting the same ethical abyss she navigated. "You saw me as weak," she said, her voice steady, threading through the hall's hush like moonlight on ice. "An omega unfit for steel or command. But weakness is the throne we build on illusions of strength. I offer you pardon, not as submission, but as the first step on a path you nearly lost." The words were philosophy incarnate, born of her spirit's trials, the air thickening with the scent of thawing frost and heather's subtle bloom. Garrick's shoulders sagged, tears carving tracks through the grime on his face, a nod of surrender that rippled through the pack like wind over snowdrifts. Alaric's hand tightened on hers, his touch a bridge across the chasm of doubt, the melancholy in his eyes yielding to a profound redemptive light. "And you, Alara," he murmured, low enough for her alone, his breath warm against the cold that nipped at her ears. "You've illuminated more than betrayals. You've shown me the king I could be, unburdened by guilt's chains. Lead them. Lead us. Not as my shadow, but as the heart that mends what war has torn." The proposal hung between them, a union forged in blood and moonlit confession, where her freedom intertwined with his healing. Resistance had long since crumbled. Acceptance bloomed like nightshade under frost, tender and inevitable. She turned to the assembly, the insignia flaring once more in silver defiance, its wolf's gaze sweeping the warriors as if claiming them anew. "The royal guard stands not on hierarchy alone," she proclaimed, her voice rising with the wind's crescendo outside, "but on choices that honor the goddess's weave. I accept this mantle, the first omega to lead, not for power, but for the compassion that turns rejection into rebirth. Draven's war may come, but we meet it whole, our scars as shields, our mercy as blades." Cheers erupted then, ragged at first, then swelling into a chorus that drowned the lingering howls, fists pounding shields in a rhythm that synced with the moon's pulse. Thorn knelt, offering his sword hilt first, a symbol of fealty that sealed her ascent. Garrick and Lear rose, integrated not as outcasts, but as redeemed, their paths realigned by her guiding light. Alaric drew her close amid the tumult, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss that tasted of pine, iron, and unspoken vows, their bond a quiet fire amid the epic roar. As the hall emptied into the night, snow falling in gentle veils that blanketed the bloodied stones, Alara stepped onto the balcony, Alaric at her side. The northern spires stretched below, silvered and serene, the wind a soft caress carrying the pack's unified huevos, a song of renascimento. Her heart, once exiled in silence, now beat in harmony with his, the insignia a talisman of their shared destiny. Sacrifice had yielded healing. Union had transcended the throne's cold isolation. What was true rebirth, if not emerging from the storm's heart, whole and unbowed, with the moon as witness to love's redemptive flame? The question dissolved into the night's embrace, leaving only the profound peace of choices honored as the first stars pierced the frost-laced sky. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.